In the twilight of the ancient world, there existed a dominion where winter was not merely a season, but a merciless tyrant.
It was a kingdom of glass and bone, stretching across a continent that had not yet heard the footfalls of man.
Here, the horizon was a razor's edge of white, and the air itself was sharp enough to freeze the breath in one's lungs. This was a land where mercy was a foreign concept, and the only law was written in the red ink of violence.
Yet, beneath the crushing silence of the glaciers, a war for the soul of the continent was festering. It was a conflict born of ambition and necessity, a rivalry that would define the very apex of power.
Two sovereigns, each claiming divine right over the steppe, stood on the precipice of war. Now, let the chronicle of this lost ruler begin. The mammoth steppe was a stage built for tragedy.
To rule here required more than strength. It demanded a philosophy of absolute dominance.
For thousands of years, the hierarchy had been clear, etched into the landscape by the solitary wanderers who claimed the kill sites as their rightful tribute. But empires, no matter how frozen or formidable, are never static. A new power had risen, one that brought with it the terrifying efficiency of the pride, and the audacity to challenge the gods of the old world.
This was not a skirmish for a single meal. It was a civil war for the crown of the ecosystem.
The wind howled through the sedge and dry grass, whispering of the coming storm.
The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the irresistible force would meet the immovable object.
The resources of the North were vast, yet finite, and the ambition of its predators was boundless.
In this cathedral of ice, there was no room for shared governance. The tension hung heavy over the plains, a palpable static charge before the lightning strike.
One dynasty would feast, and the other would fade into the drifting snow, leaving behind only the ghost of a roar.
The frozen throne was waiting, but only one could ascend its bloody steps.
To understand the sheer magnitude of the violence that was to come, one must first understand the combatants.
This was not a quarrel between scavengers picking at scraps. It was a friction between two distinct philosophies of power.
On one side stood the incumbent deity of the plains, the short-faced bear.
It was a creature that seemed to defy the natural laws of biology.
Could fit it in place. A behemoth that walked with a terrifying, stilt-legged gait, allowing it to cover vast distances with the inexorable pace of a coming storm. It was the Tyrant of the steppe, a solitary monolith of muscle and bad temper. The Tyrant did not hunt in the traditional sense. It conquered. Its philosophy was built on the concept of appropriation. Why expend energy chasing down fleet-footed prey when one could simply let the lesser creatures do the work, and then arrive to claim the prize?
Its sheer size, standing nearly 12 feet tall on its hind legs, was its primary weapon.
It projected an aura of invincibility, a god of the old world that demanded tribute from every other living thing.
It ruled through fear, a solitary fortress that required no allies. For who needs an army when you are a mountain? Enter the American lion, the king in this high-stakes drama.
If the bear was a blunt instrument of blunt trauma, the lion was a masterclass in surgical violence. Larger than any feline that walks the earth today, this was a predator honed to a razor's edge.
A golden specter that moved through the tall grass like a rumor of death. The lion's claim to the throne was not based on mere bulk, but on martial prowess and intellect.
It represented a different kind of royalty, one that was earned in blood, not merely claimed by size. While the bear was a solitary, wandering nightmare, the lion was often the general of a small, elite unit.
While the bear was a solitary, wandering nightmare, the lion was often the general of a small, elite unit. Whether operating in pairs or small prides, they brought strategy to the battlefield. They were the usurpers, the new nobility of the Pleistocene. Arrogant enough to believe that agility and precision could topple the brute force of the old gods. The tension between these two was woven into the fabric of the ecosystem. The bear viewed the lion not as a rival, but as an insolent pest, a creature that had forgotten its place in the hierarchy of fear. The lion, conversely, viewed the bear as a relic, a slow, lumbering obstacle that stood between the pride and the richest bounties of the land. For centuries, they may have circled one another in a wary detente. The lion would yield the kill, snarling in frustration as the massive bear drove them off, banking on the wisdom that survival is better than honor. But hunger has a way of rewriting the rules of engagement. As the climate shifted and the herds thinned, the buffer of abundance that kept them apart began to erode. The lion grew bolder, its patience wearing thin. The bear grew more desperate, its tolerance for challenge evaporating.
The stage was set not for a hunt, but for a duel. The tyrant believed it was untouchable. The king believed the throne was vacant. A prelude to a war where the only prize was survival. Desperation is the architect of history, and in this frozen epoch, hunger was the only currency that mattered.
The season had turned cruel. The great herds had moved south, following the phantom scent of greener pastures, leaving the steppe a hollow, howling wasteland. For the predators that remained, every day was a negotiation with death.
It was in this crucible of starvation that the inevitable collision was forged.
A solitary bison, separated from the safety of the migration, had fallen. It was a monumental kill, a cathedral of ribs and muscles steaming in the frigid air, painting the white snow in stark, violent crimson. The architects of this demise were the American lions. They had tracked the beast for miles, their golden coats matted with frost.
Their movements a testament to exhaustion and lethal determination.
They had earned this prize through the alchemy of teamwork and blood. As they tore into the carcass, the heat of the meat was a narcotic. The scent of blood is a siren song that travels for miles on the steppe wind. And it summoned the Tyrant.
The arrival of the short-faced bear was not sudden. It was an encroaching doom.
First came the silence, as lesser scavengers scattered into the brush.
Then, the rhythmic thud of massive paws. A heavy, syncopated beat that vibrated through the frozen earth.
The lions paused, their muzzles stained red, ears swiveling toward the horizon. They knew this rhythm. It was the sound of the tax collector coming to claim his tithe.
The bear emerged from the mist like a primordial deity, its silhouette blotting out the pale sun.
It did not run. It did not need to.
It simply walked, with the terrifying assurance of a creature that has never been told no.
It approached the kill site not as a thief, but as a landlord inspecting his property. In the past, this display would have been sufficient. The mere sight of the Tyrant, standing tall, sniffing the air with disdain. But today, the calculus of survival had changed. The lions were gaunt, their ribs pressing against their tawny hides like the bars of a cage.
To retreat now was not just to lose a meal. It was to accept death by starvation.
The king looked at the god, and for the first time, did not blink.
A low, rumbling growl began in the chest of the largest male lion, a sound like grinding stones.
It was a sound of heresy. The bear paused, confused by this break in the ancient protocol.
It rose to its full height, towering over the scene, a wall of fur and muscle nearly 12 feet high. It chuffed, swaying its massive head, expecting the insolence to evaporate in the face of its grandeur.
But the lions did not run.
They fanned out, their movements fluid and synchronized, forming a golden crescent around the carcass. This was the defining moment of the conflict.
The bear dropped to all fours and then rose again, slamming its paws into the earth. A display of seismic power intended to shatter the lion's resolve. The lions countered with a chorus of snarls, bearing sabers of ivory that gleamed in the cold light.
The rivalry had moved beyond instinct into the realm of ego and desperation.
The tyrant demanded submission. The king declared war. The carcass lay between them, no longer just meat, but the symbol of a changing world.
The air grew tight, stretching until it could hold no more tension.
The truce of the ages was over. It was the king who struck first, a gamble of breathtaking audacity. Abandoning the caution that had kept its species alive for millennia,
The male lion launched himself not at the throat, but at the flank of the towering giant.
it was a calculated provocation, a strike meant to turn the fortress. The short-faced bear roared, a sound that seemed to tear the very air apart, and swung a paw the size of a shield.
But the king was already gone, a golden blur slipping under the guard of the slow-moving titan.
The war had begun. The bear was a siege tower, immovable and devastating, possessing the power to crush bone with a single blow. But the lions were the win. They fought with a strategy as old as the hunt itself. Divide and conquer. While the male held the tyrant's gaze, roaring and fainting with mock charges.
The females circled behind, striking at the hamstrings, snapping at the heels of the god.
The snow erupted into a cloud of white powder and red mist. The bear spun, its massive claws tearing furrows into the frozen earth. But for all its reach, it was fighting ghosts. Every time it lunged to crush one tormentor, two more would strike from the blind spots. The tyrant was accustomed to enemies that fled or stood frozen in terror. It had no defense against a synchronized insurrection. This was the weakness of the solitary god. It had no kin to guard its back. Yet, the power of the short-faced bear was undeniable.
A glancing blow sent one of the lionesses tumbling across the ice, winded and bruised. A stark reminder of the fragile line between bravery and suicide.
The bear stood its ground over the carcass, jaws snapping with the force of a hydraulic press,
daring the shadows to close in again.
It was a stalemate of attrition.
The bear had the strength to kill them all, but it lacked the speed to catch them.
The lions had the speed to wound, but lacked the weight to deliver the killing blow. But in the wild, energy is the most precious resource, and the bear was spending it at a ruinous rate. Its breath came in ragged, steaming plumes. The god was tiring. The lions, sensing the shift in momentum, tightened the noose. They did not need to kill the giant. They only needed to make the cost of the meal higher than the reward.
The king stepped forward again, blood dripping from a gash on his shoulder.
His eyes burning with a cold, predatory intelligence.
He roared, not a warning this time, but a proclamation.
The bear hesitated. For the first time in its long, uncontested reign, the calculation of survival tipped against it. The pain of a dozen small wounds and the exhaustion of the brawl weighed heavier than the hunger. With a final, thunderous growl of frustration, a sound of abdication, the tyrant turned.
It did not run, for gods do not flee, but it retreated, surrendering the field to the new masters of the steppe. The fortress had not fallen, but the siege had been successful.
The king stood atop the fallen bison, his golden coat matted with the crimson spoils of war.
Around him, the pride feasted, tearing into the flesh with the fervor of those who have cheated death.
For a brief, shining moment in the history of the continent, the American lion was the undisputed sovereign.
The short-faced bear, the dethroned god, vanished into the swirling white mist. The hierarchy had been rewritten in blood. The agile and the many had toppled the massive and the few. But in the land of monsters, no victory is permanent, and no throne is eternal.
The true enemy of these titans was not each other, but the relentless march of time itself.
Even as the lions celebrated their dominion, the sky above was changing. The great ice sheets, which had sculpted this world of violence, began to weep.
The temperatures rose, not with the sudden fury of a battle, but with the slow, suffocating inevitability of a fever. The vast, open steppes, the arena that allowed the lion to run and the bear to wander, were swallowed by encroaching forests and sinking bogs. The stage was being dismantled beneath their feet.
The speed of the lion became useless in the thicket. The size of the bear became a burden in a world of scarcity.
They were creatures designed for a frozen empire that was rapidly melting into memory.
In the end, the war for supremacy mattered little to the earth.
The silence returned to the steppe, but it was a different silence, one devoid of the roar and the heavy footfall. The king and the god, locked in their eternal rivalry, walked together into the twilight of extinction, leaving behind a kingdom that no longer remembered their names.
History is not always written in stone. Often, it is written in snow, only to be washed away when the seasons turn.
These were not merely animals that lived and died. They were dynasties that rose and fell.
As the ice retreated, it took their stories with it, burying their fury and their glory beneath the soil of a new world. We walk upon their graves, unaware that beneath our feet lie the bones of giants.
Who once fought for the right to rule the earth.